Welcome to Painting with Karmia. Today, instead of an actual painting with watercolor, what I'm going to be doing is a black and white manga style illustration. This is basically based on the illustrations you would see in light novels, so it is a single illustration but uses manga shading techniques instead of being in color. And so one thing I wanted to discuss for traditional artists is the big issue that screen tones are extremely expensive to import. Since there isn't a big market for it in the West, you have to import them directly from Japan typically, and they can be very pricey. There are a few issues with this, of course. The amount of screen toning you need to do an actual manga, like chapter after chapter after chapter, is just prohibitively expensive, for example. I actually have a whole pack of Japanese screen tones, which I special ordered from Japan once. These were a used set, which weren't actually used. They're just a little old. I suspect that probably someone got into manga a bit as a kid and they were interested in doing stuff, and so people got them a bunch of gifts. You know how people give artists gifts of stuff that you don't really wind up using because it's not actually what you like that maybe, and then they were like, actually I'm not that into it, and they never wound up using more than one or two of these. So they're all in really good shape, just a little bit old, and so you can see what a manga screen tone looks like here. So this is just a one with flowers, and you can see these have been printed so that they are semi-transparent behind the sticker sheet. So you can lay it down over your art and then trace what you need with a knife and cut it. So that's this type, and it's very easy to peel up, and the adhesive is slightly weak, so it's very easy to transfer it. However, getting these, especially for things like shading, is very expensive. I have one for shading here for darker shades, and you can see it would not go very far. So that's a major issue you have when doing that. So one thing I wound up doing for my character art is actually using copics. I have a whole set of copics in here, and I personally am not a fan of markers normally for art because I think that they're very expensive. They don't blend like watercolor does. So if you really were dedicated, I don't do this, but if you were dedicated, you could just get a set of 12 or 20 watercolor pans in a little tin, and then you could mix all of those to create all of the other colors you want. So you can do that, and it's much more affordable. Meanwhile, with copics, they just don't blend very well. You need the C2 and then C3 for the grays, and you need to blend them into each other. You cannot blend very disparate colors the way you can with a water-based medium. So that is a major problem with copics. However, I will say that for certain tasks, they are actually really good, and I found that they were very good for doing manga-style illustrations. It's not very convenient to do things like water-based stuff because the types of paper, very smooth marker paper for example, which takes Japanese pen nibs well, does not take water-based medium well. Or you could then use paper which does, like for example you could use, or you could do that and do ink washes, but you would need to use a paper which takes water-based mediums, and those are really expensive. So there's a lot of little issues like that. So here is the main set of colors that I use. They don't really fit on the tin lid, which is where I really store them. But anyway, I have C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C7. I'm not sure if there is a C6. If there is, I'd like that. And then just the pure jet black. I do have a C0, but I found that it doesn't show up in the scanner, so it was a little bit of a waste. I suppose I could just use it for blending. And I do have some colorless blenders as well. But yeah, that's basically what I use. And so for the main characters, I'm going to be using that. And then for the background, for certain like shoujo manga details, I'm going to be using screen tones. And I actually have some homemade screen tones. I made these myself, printing them out on sticker sheets, and they actually work pretty well. So I'll talk about that later when I actually get to applying them, but you can see here, these are some that I printed for myself. These are new, I just printed them because I needed some of these. And then I also have some old ones I printed, like some little embroidery patterns and some sakura and stuff like that. So I've been having a lot of fun making those, and when I get to the point of actually applying those and some screen tone stuff, I'll talk about that more. But for now, just going to get to work on the main shading. So one of the first things I like to do is just start laying out some of the characters' shadows on their skin and things like that. So getting all of these shadowed areas here in the collarbone, for example, a little bit in the ear, where his hair falls, stuff like that. How did that happen? The pencil must have been so dark that it completely made me not realize. Well, I can just fix that. I would say that if you do find a tiny area like that which you haven't filled in, you can just use a little pen like this instead of a proper manga pen. It's not going to make a good sharp illustration for your entire set of art, but just for a little fix like that that's very quick, I think it's not too big a deal. I would normally prefer to use proper manga pen nibs though. Here is the school nib, which I use for most of my main character art, for example. So that's awkward, but things like that happen. We're only human. And oh, I didn't erase this part. Let's just erase a little bit of pencil on his hand, and here. There we are. Okay, so I'm just going to continue with that, and most of this I'll just be doing now silent with the fast forward on, because it's just deciding where to add shades and things like that. Okay, this is all the same session and I'm already nearly done. Now, one of the next things I have to do is the hair. Obviously the painting still looks drawing still looks really weird with the characters not having their hair shaded in, so I'm going to get going on that. I have a pretty detailed layering process when using the gray copics within the black for the darkest shades, which I'll show you how I do. It's actually pretty similar to how I do hair with watercolor paints, where I start laying down the lower layers, leaving in highlights, and then start adding in shadows and blending. The thing is with this that while I really like the results, I do have to emphasize that it's something which takes a long time in comparison to what you would really want if you were drawing an actual manga chapter. I would not do a lot of this shading if I was doing a manga chapter instead of an individual illustration. What I would probably do in that case is for the lighter colors, like say these, I would still use the copics because that would be easier in comparison to cutting out screen tones and save a lot of money. And then for the darker shades, I would probably say screen tones would be the way to go there. And I did want to show you, this is my old volume of Fushingi Yungi, very, very old. This is the original Un-America Extra graphic novel version, which was printed in very nice quality paper. I really wish that hadn't gone out of fashion. But I want to find a nice illustration where you can see a character's hair in a lot of detail. Let's see. Where is one? Nice close-up. Sorry, I just really want to show that because I think it's a good example of how you can do hair in black while still getting a lot of detail and highlights. Here, this set of Miyaka has it. So you can see that her hair is just black, but there's a lot of highlights left in, and this gives a huge feeling of definition. Even though it's really just black with a lot of white left, it really looks really detailed and gives that feeling of shading and definition. And then when she doesn't have time for that, she does lay it over with a screen tone. Of course, I have to note that manga artists also have studios of assistants to do stuff like this for them, so that's something else that we tend to forget, I think, when talking about how long manga takes. But anyway, so what I'm going to start doing is very carefully in these areas, adding in the first layer, and I'm just kind of doing these little quick strokes which are meant to feel like brush painting, I guess. And I do need to remember to leave in highlights. That's one of the things that you always have to remember with any medium like this, is to leave your highlights in because you can't add them in later. I think artists who are used to more solid mediums like oil and acrylic, they do it entirely the opposite way around, where instead they have to lay down all the darkest colors and they can actually add white later. You cannot do that with a medium like this. So here we are. We're just build up that feeling of hair strands, while leaving in highlights. I could probably in some of these areas be a bit thicker, especially when I'm trying to get close to the edge. And then once I've done both of these, done these layers for both characters, I can then move on to the next color and add more shadows in the next gray, and then after that I can add black, and then I'll blend so that it all blends together and looks more natural. Okay, that's Wei Wuxian, and here's Lan Wangji's hair. So remember to leave in some areas which are not as dark. Since his hair is coming up against robes which are pale, I do have to be a bit more careful not to let it streak too far. It doesn't matter if it gets a little bit into that because he already has dark robes, but with Lan Wangji I have to be more careful. So my idea for this picture basically was the flower banquet. I believe that it's implied, it's not directly stated, but Wei Wuxian wound up leaving the flower banquet because, well, everyone was being awful to him because this is a story about classism and prejudice in part. And I kind of thought, what if he didn't? And he is now flirting with Lan Wangji, and he puts a flower on his head like he did when they were kids studying at cloud recesses. So here we are. Now I need to wait just a sec for this to dry so I can put my hand back here and I can start working on it with the next layer of color. You know, I probably could have done something like the here or the curtains in real screen tone, but I didn't think to. Whoops, sorry. That would have been a good way to illustrate that, but I didn't think to. I do sometimes wind up with a bit of an area where, since I'm worried about hitting stuff, I do let it kind of be a little bit not quite coming up against the skin, and I just kind of have to live with that because I can't take back mistakes. Then after this layer we will have black, and then we'll blend it. So I'm going to stop babbling at you now and just keep doing this because, well, it doesn't take super long in comparison to watercolor painting. It will still take a little bit of time. Okay, I'm not 100% sure how happy I am with this. There are a few little things that I got wrong, and I feel like I could have done the hair shading better, but well, things happen, and with traditional art, you can't fix it. You can redo it if you really hate it, but you kind of have to make that assessment of, is it a tiny little thing that I think I could have done better? Just mark that as, do that better next time. If it's something really big that you think ruins the piece, then yes, you could actually redo it. But the only thing is here you can see that I accidentally got the line of the balcony railing through his sleeve. That's very awkward, and I can't really fix that, unfortunately. I suppose I could try to fix it digitally, but we'll see. And then this is sort of mixed. I have checked this position of the hand in the mirror, and it's totally possible. It just looks kind of odd in the picture, so I don't know how I feel about that, but that's just a little thing. So I have two different sort of shoujo style screen tones. I forgot to mention that these are screen tones which are made for free by artists. This is an artist named Kabocha, who has a website, shootingstars.org, and it has a whole bunch of beautiful traditional screen tones for shoujo manga with a lot of like the little different shapes and bubbles and things like that. And I want to figure out which one I would like to use. Here is a nice point to start peeling, and here's another. And one thing I do, which I don't do with Japanese screen tones, is I actually kind of fluff it off on my hand. My hands are clean, obviously. I just washed them before I came to work, because this will help remove a little bit of that glue so that it can be removed more easily. Now, I should have cut a piece of a Japanese screen tone so you could see that while this is maybe the tiniest bit more opaque, it's not much. But anyway, here we are. So let's just very carefully see if I like how that looks now that I actually am putting it like this. Oh, I would not put it that way. I would have to cut around first. Oh dear, okay. Plus I just inked it. Okay, now I know. I don't like the idea of doing that. I might do a different piece. Alright, a little disappointing, but it happens. So I'm just going to put it back on the sheet, and then I might just cut out one of those little hexagon-y pieces instead. Or the other thing I could do is actually cut around them more so it's closer, but I'm a little iffy about that. I would have to cut so much around them. Yeah, I think that doing a bunch of smaller pieces like these would probably make more sense, and then trim into the area where it's going to attach to character. Okay. I think I like this one. I'm going to start with that one. This is something I'm still kind of working on because I wasn't able to get traditional screen tones in the past at an affordable price. I didn't use them a lot, and so I need to kind of practice working with them. But here you are. It's something I am learning. So here it is. And I can figure out exactly where I want to put it, and then I do kind of want to put it in between them somewhere. Or should I put it here? Okay, very carefully I'm going to start. I don't want to actually cut through the whole thing yet. I'm just going to create a little score around where Lan Wangji's sleeve is, so that we are not cutting the paper, the art underneath, but we now have a guide for what to remove. Okay, so that is about it. this is pretty much done. Now, depending on what the lighting on the camera looks like, I don't know if you can see the edges of where the screen tones are. When I hold it in the light properly, it doesn't show up, and I'm hoping to be able to remove this effect in the scanner, which is something I would have to talk about in a different video. There are ways to remove shadows from slightly three-dimensional things like your textured watercolor paper or screen tones when you scan something, but that's for another day. For now, this is about it for the picture. As with watercolor, I'm very leery of overworking it. Overall, I really like how this works, and I am starting to think about transitioning more to a hybrid mix of the copics and screen tones, especially for some of these dark areas that are difficult to do in copics without streaking. But we'll have to see and experiment with that in the future. However, I'm really pleased with how, at least for some of these types of decorative screen tones, the homemade screen tones work. They're not perfect, but they are good, and I am very pleased with the effect overall. So that's great because it saves me a lot of money. These sheets are much cheaper than importing all of them from Japan. Well, if you're interested in trying to make your own homemade screen tones, I hope that this kind of gave you the idea that, yeah, this is something you can do. You can absolutely make your own. They may not be quite as good as the pro ones, but when you live overseas and you can't afford to buy Japanese screen tones very frequently, this is definitely something to look into. In general, you can look into hybrid methods like this, and there we are. I'm always trying to improve my art and think about ways I could do it better and things like that, and I do think that I have some things that I'm working on which I'm pleased with and just need to keep improving at. So, as always, thank you so much for watching, and please join me again next time for another video. If you liked it, then please give it a thumbs up and maybe comment and talk to me about manga and stuff like that. I would love to chat with you about that. Okay, until next time, bye!